Hello, this is Vulturefire, and this is part 3 of my guide to the Vortex. This part will be covering the first of the aspects. This is the aspect of avarice. So, covered in the previous videos in part 1 how the Vortex is broken down, but quick refresher, there are 2 aspect bosses before you get to the actual Mudrara fight, and which ones are random and you can check on the map. So, I'm just going to go through them in alphabetical order, 1 aspect per part. Let's get into the aspect of avarice. First of all, the main themes. So the quick overview, the short version is Aspect of Avarice, which is the donut, loves to summon. It summons these Hands of Avarice, which have a decent amount of health. They can do quite a lot of debuffs. And the aspect itself loves to do poison and decay and to nullify and various other debuffs. I am going to get into a detailed list of what the aspect does with each of its actions, as well as what the hands can do. But if you were just trying to figure out what the primary gimmick is, it is debuff spam. It is worth noting that, as best I recall, and I'll correct myself once I get into the actual actions, that it does not apply leech, which is very helpful because leech, of course, with the number of debuffs that it can apply to you, leech would result in a substantial amount of damage per turn. So the aspects. Actual actions. First of all, Opportunist. So Opportunist is relevant for every aspect because even if the Idol of Hunt isn't active, and even if the aspect cannot itself gain Opportunist from its abilities, there is a Manic Presence weather card that does give Opportunist to all enemies, and so it is worth being aware of what the Opportunist attack is. And so for the Aspect of Avarice, that is a 3x3 attack base. And all the damage numbers here will be the base number, which means that if idols are active, that will increase that. Or if they have buffs like Powerful, that could increase it as well. So it's going to do that 3x3 damage. It's going to give you Decay 1, and then the aspect is going to gain Lifesteal 4. So Decay can obviously be a debuff that can be a big problem for certain decks because it cannot be cleansed completely away, and it scales up as you create cards. So even Decay 1 can be enough to start the ball rolling. So if you're a deck that's planning to play treasures or Shadowbone caches or create tools or create Bloodburst or any number of other things, you may want to avoid tripping the Opportunist unless you have Purity available. So the next note here is that Aspect of Avarice, with its actual actions, it will randomly choose between most of its actions, but if it doesn't have any summons when it changes action, which will normally be at the start after all enemies have taken their turn, or when you use the card Mind Probe, which changes enemy action. So if those are the case, then it will always change to this action, which is 4x4 AoE damage. So that AoE here means area of effect. It means it will hit you and your summons. And the aspect will attempt to summon one Hand of Avarice, and it will divide 200 max health across all enemies. This includes any shades that you may have summoned. Now it's worth noting this is divided. So for example, if there's just the aspect and the hand, it will be 100 max health for the aspect and 100 max health for the hand. If there are 3 enemies because you summon a Vengeful Shade, it will be 66 health, or I think it'll round up, so it'll be 67 health extra to the Shade and the hand and the aspect itself. And then if the summon is blocked because you have filled the board with either summons or shades, then because it didn't get to summon, it will divide 100 healing and powerful 6 across all enemies, which means that if it is the only enemy, because you have blocked all the other spots with summons, it will just heal itself for 100 and gain powerful 6. It is worth remembering, though, it starts with an AoE attack, so if there isn't space, but it kills something with the AoE attack, that could make space for the hand to be summoned into. Like I said, it will swap back to this every time it starts a turn, every time that there isn't a hand alive when it goes to change action, which means if you kill the hand every turn, you will need to fight it will summon a new hand every turn. Well, every other turn, because it doesn't change action immediately. So let's say turn 1, it will summon a hand. Turn 2, if you kill the hand, it will do another action on turn 2 because when it chose its action, the hand was alive. And then on turn 3, it will summon another hand again. So most likely, if you are playing a deck that has a lot of front heavy damage, you'll probably be fighting a new hand every other turn, so be prepared for that. So if it does have at least one summon, instead it will randomly do one of these 4 actions. It can deal 4x8 damage and gain Lifesteal 8, it is in that order, so it will get the extra lifesteal after it does the damage. Or if it does a lot of debuffs, these are area of effect debuffs, which means again it will hit you and your summons. It is Poison 20, Decay 1, Frail 2, and Nullify 1. And the next action after that is deal 3x6 damage. It shovels 2 Globes of Gluttony into your deck, and it puts 2 Shrivels on top. So this is honestly not that bad. I messed up and I put the Globe of Gluttony on the next page, but I will talk about that in a moment. And then the last one is it can give you Decay 1, Nullify 1, Curse 8, and put 2 Shrivels on top. So one of the things here that is nice about knowing what all the actions are is that even though you can't tell what a debuff is from what from just seeing your red arrow, if you know all the things that an enemy can do, you can check and see. You can consult this list and see what matches. So, for example, if it's doing single target debuffs and creating cards, it's got to be Decay, Nullify, and Curse. And every time that I have listed out debuffs, it is in that order, which means that if you have, say, Purity 1, and it does this action, the Purity will block the Decay. You'll get hit by the Nullify and the Curse. If you have Purity 2, you'll block the Decay and the Nullify, and you'll get hit by the Curse. And similar for this. So that can be very important if you know that there are specific debuffs you want to avoid. In this case, being able to get 2 ranks of Purity will be important for blocking this Decay, although it's worth noting that saying that assumes that the hands aren't debuffing you, and the hands will almost always be debuffing you. So you'll need a lot more Purity than that. Talk about the hands after I get done talking about what the main aspect does. So this is the Globe of Gluttony that I forgot to put on the previous page. You get 4 mana, you draw 2, and then it divides 80 heal and powerful 6 equally among all enemies. This is a blight, but it can be quite good. If you can deal with the healing that it applies, this is a lot of mana, and this is like a super mana font in terms of effect, with the downside of dividing out heal and powerful. But especially if you're arcane focused and you're going to be blowing up all the enemies powerful anyway, or if you are freeze focused and the enemy isn't getting a turn, playing these out can be quite good for you. So when the Aspect of Avarice dies, it will summon 4 Hands of Avarice, and then it will divide 60 shield across all enemies, and then divide powerful 20 across all enemies, and then divide divinity 12 across all enemies for each hand that couldn't be summoned. The aspect itself takes up 2 spaces, so you could theoretically block the others, leading to you only having 2 Hands of Avarice after it dies. If that happens, then you would get 24 divinity divided against the 2 of them, which divided across 2 of them, I believe, which would be a substantial damage reduction. But the important thing here is that the hands that are spawned from this will get to act immediately. So be prepared for that. It can be, if you you ideally want to kill Aspect of Avarice with a debuff that will kill at the end of its turn, or at the very start of your turn when you have other stuff on hand to deal with the summons. What you don't want to do is kill the Aspect of Avarice with the last card you play in a turn, because if you do, you will take probably a lot of damage from the hands if you're not prepared for them. Take a lot of damage, a lot of debuffs, and they potentially will be able to kill you even after the main aspect is dead. So be aware of that. As for the hands themselves, they always start with Permanent Envenom 1 and Lifesteal 20, but their actual attacks are relatively weak. So the reason they have 20 Lifesteal is because they need that much in order to consistently actually heal back an amount that matters. Their Opportunist attack, they deal 3x2 damage, they give Poison 10, and they gain Powerful 2. This is a relatively weak Opportunist attack, as you can see, which means that, and because the debuff is just Poison, which is affected by damage modifiers, although Opportunist attacks always have effect from damage modifiers, if you have Plated or Tough and they're weak, you can pretty safely trip this Opportunist attack, especially relative to like how dangerous the actual aspect's decay can be. The normal actions the hand does, they have 3, and they will randomly swap between them. The first is a bunch of debuffs, and those debuffs are Poison, Vulnerable, Weak, and Leech. Okay, so I was wrong. The main aspect doesn't do Leech. The hands can. So, and of course, Leech will mean that they will heal the hand when Leech pops. Another thing they can do is they can deal 6x2 damage and gain Powerful 2. And then their area of effect attack is 2x3 area of effect damage and give Crystallize 2 and Frail 1 an area of effect. It's also worth noting that because they have this permanent Envenom, if you have Purity, their attacks will pop your Purity. So either you'll have to dispel the Envenom, or you will have to freeze them if you don't want them, if they're doing an attack and you don't want them to eat your Purity before it can be used to either block this or to block whatever the actual aspect itself does. So generally, that's all of the information I have for you on what the aspect actually does during fights. In my opinion, this tends to be one of the easier aspects. It is relatively low damage compared to some of the others. It has less ability to just block out turns. It doesn't do things like dump a Mountain of Bleed on you, or fill your entire deck with trash, or dump Arcane Leak on you, or attack you for 80x5 or something crazy like that. It just applies some debuffs to you. Like, it's not a free fight, don't get me wrong. It can absolutely kill you, but it tends to be less of a threat than some of the other aspects, especially if you can kill the hands relatively efficiently. In general, what I would say is, if you can't beat Aspect of Avarice, you probably weren't beating any of the aspects. It would tend to be how I would look at it. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the reward cards, the last part of this. So after you beat Aspect of Avarice, you will be offered one of these two reward cards. If you have a reroll, you can force the other. And of these two cards, one of them is potentially very good, and the other is not really, in my opinion. So Horde gives you 3 treasures, which I didn't pull up a screenshot of treasure here, but I assume that you're familiar with it if you are watching a Depth 4 video. These are the same treasures you would see anywhere from any of the other cards of Breach Wanderers. You also get 3 Globes of Gluttony. So Globes of Gluttony gain you 4 mana and draw 2, and then they still will divide 80 heal and powerful 6 equally among all enemies. So Horde is very bad if you're going to have to deal with Decay. Playing Horde into Decay is a real bad time. But if you're not hit by Decay, Horde is kind of bonkers. The worst case scenario here is that it is 6 mana for 3 treasures, which is fine. But in the event that you can afford to play out the Globes of Gluttony, this is effectively plus 6 mana, plus 5 cards in hand, plus draw 6, plus 3 treasures that are effectively free because I'm counting the mana from the Globes of Gluttony as what you're paying for them. And then when it upgrades, it's 4 treasures and 4 Globes of Gluttony, at which point you better hope you have a max hand size upgrade, because otherwise, wow, it is very hard to play Horde Plus. Horde Plus does cost 4 mana instead of 3, but it's worth it because you get an extra Globe, which is worth 4 extra mana, assuming, again, that you have the hand space for it. Obviously, it is... You will have to judge for yourself how many Globes that you can afford to play. But one thing to note about the Globes is that they are temporary. So if you either don't want to play them or you can't afford to because of a lack of just the ability to manage this particular turn, you don't have to play them. If you don't need the mana, you don't need the draw, you don't want to deal with opportunities, you don't have to play them, and they're temporary, and they'll just go away. They won't clog your deck. The other note here is that treasures can give you random status, which can give you freeze and arcane, which means that sometimes what you can do is you can pop Horde, see if you can get freeze or arcane out of, or see if you can get random status treasures, and then depending on that, choose to use globes accordingly. So Horde can be, just a very powerful card. I think it is easily worth considering. And in general, unless the other cards offered are very good, I will probably take Horde because most decks are pretty happy to have it. So the other cards, the other card is Manifold Infection, which is 5 mana skill or 5 mana spell because it applies poison. You give any enemy Poison 8, Enfeebled 2, Curse 2, Nullify 2, Leech 2. Upgrade is Poison 12, Enfeebled 2, Curse 3, Nullify 2, and Leech 3. So the reason I'm not a huge fan of this one is because a couple reasons. One, it's pretty expensive. 5 mana is a lot. It does give you some pretty rare debuffs, but almost all of the value on this, I would say, is riding on this Nullify. Because, the poison is not that much poison for the mana cost. Like, Curse 2 is effectively nothing against Depth 4 enemies. Like, Aspect of Avarice. I should have included the starting health on it. I didn't think to. It has like 1,000 health, something like that. So, 4 damage a turn against that much health is nothing. The leech is nice, but, it's, again, if you don't have other leech sources, if you're playing this, you probably want to already have other leech sources. So it's just like a couple extra ranks of leech, but that's not a huge deal. And like leech is generally much cheaper than 5 mana for 2 ranks. The Nullify here is really the selling point. And it is only really good if you are confident that you can judge when Nullify will be useful. Now, Nullify can do a lot of good for you. Nullify can block things like Divinity, which you otherwise can't get rid of most of the time. Nullify could block the enemy from gaining any number of powerful buffs. However, like I said, it's a 5-cost card. It doesn't immediately have an impact. The Enfeebled could potentially be a downside in some cases because if the enemy's damage modifier is below, if it's doing like negative damage because like you're tough, you are tough and it is weak, and you have maybe like some fortress, so you're counteracting the divinity that the enemy might have, then enfeebling the enemy could actually increase how much damage you're taking, which can be unfortunate. So for all of those reasons, I am not a huge fan of Manifold Infection. I have no doubt I am underrating it slightly, but yeah. Horde is good. Take Horde. That's my advice. So that's it for part 3 of my field guide for the Vortex. I do still plan to be releasing these every day, but I'm not recording them that far in advance. So if there are things that you think I am not covering for aspects that I should be, or things that I just in general, if there's any changes that you would like to see, let me know in the comments. And if you leave it shortly after I posted this video, there's a decent chance that you will see those changes reflected in some of the later parts of this series. But that's going to be it for now. I will see you tomorrow for part 4 of the Aspect of Conquest. Until then, toodles.